Hello again, class. Today we're going to start a series of probably many lectures on what we call the early Republic time period. That's the time period after the Constitution's been adopted, starting in 1789 when Washington's elected president. Well, he's elected in 1788, takes office in 1789, along with the first Congress. And this period will go through, or at least our lectures will go through, basically James Monroe's presidency. And then after that, we'll get into what's called the Age of Jackson in a few weeks. But for the next several lectures, we're going to be talking about this early time period during the Republic. All right, so our last lectures, we finished out talking about the Constitution. So what we have to think about is, great, there's a piece of paper, 50-something people in Philadelphia spent a summer writing it. It was eventually adopted and ratified by all the states. But what do we do with it? Well, you have to use it to create a government. That's what the Constitution is there for. It sets up the rules for government. So now that you have the rules, you have to go about actually creating a government. All right. So the first couple, maybe even three lectures we do for the early Republic time period are going to focus on this man, George Washington. As you all know, he's the first president. He was the general, the main general during the Revolutionary War. Given his popularity after that war, he's going to be easily elected to be the first president. So that's where this famous phrase comes in: first in war, first in peace, first in the hearts of his countrymen. All right, so this is background. You don't have to write this down in your notes, but just know it, understand it. So if you don't know, so who is George Washington? Well, he was 56 when he became president. So he'd already had a long life in public office. He'd been a member of the House of Burgesses. Well, even before that, as we know, he fought during the French and Indian War, fought for the British in that war. Then he's in the House of Burgesses in Virginia for a long time. As we know, he's the general for the Continental Army during the Revolutionary War. He was the president for the Constitutional Convention. So by the time he becomes president, he's done quite a bit of public service, both militarily and politically. So he's seen as the logical choice to become president. He's from Virginia, which was the biggest and therefore the most powerful state, at least in terms of political power in the new Congress, because they'd get the most representatives in the House of Representatives. He's a slaveholder, as most of these founding fathers from Virginia were. As we know, Revolutionary War hero. And also, he's one of the richest presidents. He came from a rich family. He had this huge plantation. Then he married, basically, who at the time I believe was the richest widow in Virginia, Martha, then Custis, then eventually becomes Martha Washington. So he has his dad's money, his wife's money, and he had made a lot of money on his plantation too. So he's one of the richest presidents. So the first presidential election is held in 1787. And remember, the Constitutional Convention took place a year earlier in 1787. It took about a year for the required 9 states to ratify. So once those states ratify the Constitution, you have your first presidential election. And George Washington is elected unanimously. Now, this doesn't mean every single person in the country voted for him, because remember, we pick our presidents through the Electoral College. All right, if you've been paying attention to the news during the 2020 election, you should know lots about the Electoral College. All right, so the Electoral College is set up to choose the president, so each state gets a certain number of electors in the Electoral College based on how big the state is. And every single one of these members of the Electoral College in 1788 votes for George Washington. John Adams finishes second. Back then, for our first few presidential elections, you basically elected two people. You'd vote for two people to be president. Whoever came in first would be president, and whoever came in second would be vice president. So John Adams becomes vice president because he came in second in the Electoral College vote. You don't have to write this down, but just understand when Washington took office, Washington, D.C. did not exist yet. It hadn't been built. Right? The first capital was in New York City. It would stay there for a couple of years. Then it would move to Philadelphia. And we will talk here, maybe in the next lecture or the lecture after that, why the capital was ultimately put into Washington, D.C. Basically, why was Washington, D.C. created and the capital put there. All right, so Washington was elected unanimously in 1788 by the Electoral College. Once again in 1792, Washington's going to run for president again, and he again is going to receive 100% of the Electoral College votes. He's the only president to do so, and he did it twice. All right, so in 1788, you elect the president, George Washington. The members of Congress are elected. But remember, we have three branches of government. All right, so Washington's elected. He's the executive. All right, in the executive branch, you have Congress, which is the legislative branch. You need a judicial branch. All right, and the Constitution didn't say a whole lot about creating the judicial branch. Basically said Congress should create a Supreme Court and any lesser courts. So that's one of the first acts the Congress did. So you have your election in 1788. The members of Congress take office in 1789, and one of the first things they do is pass the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789, which creates the Supreme Court and a few other lower courts. There weren't nearly as many courts as there are today. There weren't nearly as many judges or justices. For example, the Supreme Court, when it was first created, you only had 6 justices. A justice, basically just think of it as a judge. That's what we call judges at the Supreme Court. If you're on the Supreme Court, you're not called a judge, you're called a justice. There are only 6 of them. There are 9 now. So the judicial branch was really a lot smaller, as is all aspects of the government in the 1700s. So the Federal Judiciary Act of 1789 creates the Supreme Court and other lower courts. Washington appoints our old friend John Jay as the first Chief Justice. All right, so remember John Jay. We keep hearing this name, and a lot of people forget about him today. But he helped negotiate the Treaty of Paris along with Franklin and Adams. He helped write some of the Federalist Papers with Madison and Hamilton. And now he's going to be the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. He's not going to be the most famous because he's only going to serve for a few years, and someone who's going to come after him, John Marshall, is going to set out really the real important Supreme Court opinions of the time. But nonetheless, John Jay is the first Chief Justice of the Supreme Court. This last bullet point, you don't really probably need to write in your notes. Just understand, it also created what is called the Department of Justice, which is led by the Attorney General. The first Attorney General is a guy named Edmund Randolph. He's going to be a member of Washington's cabinet. All right, and here I'm about to explain exactly what is a president's cabinet. It's not a place where the president puts his dishes. It's a group of advisors. Okay. We'll talk about that here in a minute, but just understand, and let's go back to George Washington. Obviously he's on our $1 bill. He's on the quarter. Most people that can rightfully remember him as being the first president of the United States. But why is he important? Is he important just because he came first? Certainly a lot of people are going to remember that. But I'm going to, point out a few things that he did that, we remember his presidency not just for it being first, but for a couple of things or a few things that he did during that presidency. The presidents still do today. All right, he sort of created the presidency. Right? If you remember when we talked about the Constitution, there's not a whole lot of ink spent detailing how the president's supposed to act or what he's supposed to do in the Constitution. And so Washington sort of had to make it up, a lot of it up as he went along. All right, so he sets the example that other presidents follow. All right, what are some of these examples? First, he's called Mr. President. All right, no one really knew what to call the president when it was created. You called kings like Your Highness, or Your Excellencies, things like that. And so people sometimes would try that with Washington, and he would have none of it. He wanted to make a point that we did not create another king. The president is not supposed to be a king. The Anti-Federalists were afraid that that's what would happen if the Constitution was ratified. But Washington wanted to put an end to that fear. And so Washington was very careful not to have anyone call him Your Highness or Excellency or anything that smacked of monarchy and that sounded like you'd be talking to a king. So he had people refer to him as Mr. President. Second, he relied on a cabinet. All right, this is a group of advisors. All right, the president still does that. Now, in current days, the president's cabinet is much, much, much bigger than Washington's was. Here in a minute, we're going to talk about Washington's cabinet. It was made up of 4 people. Today, it's much bigger. The official members of cabinet, I believe there are 15 or 16 of them, and then they each have hundreds and hundreds of people working for them. Washington's cabinet was much smaller, but he created it, and presidents still use one to this very day. Lastly, and I put this last, but this is most important. Washington retired. All right, he quit basically, and it doesn't seem like much of a compliment to say, what did George Washington? What was the most important thing he accomplished during his presidency? And the answer being, well, he quit. That doesn't sound like much of a compliment, but in fact, it is very important because remember, in Europe, for hundreds and hundreds of years, whoever ruled a country, a king or queen, would stay there until they died. And then their son or sometimes daughter would take over. And that's how countries were ruled. In Washington, he was elected unanimously 2 times. He probably certainly could have been elected another third time if he wanted. But it's important to him that he showed that that's not how we do things in this country. Presidents don't serve for life. Okay, so he retired after only 2 terms. And so it's this example that later the Constitution was amended to make this a rule that presidents have to retire after only 2 terms. You can only, once you get elected, you can only run 1 more time, or at least you can only get elected 1 more time. You can only be elected a total of 2 times. And Washington set this example, and it's an example we still follow today. And this is very important to establish that our country was going to be different than England. It was going to be different than France and Spain. All right, we weren't going to be ruled for monarchs for their life and then just turned over to their sons or daughter. We were going to have elections every 4 years, and we were going to get new presidents every 4 or 8 years. And so don't ever underestimate the importance of this part of Washington's presidency. The fact that he didn't try to take office for life, is a huge gift he gave the country because it established this idea that the country is more important than the rulers, that the voters are more important than the presidents. That presidents are going to come and go, and that's a good thing. Because no one that way can take too much power and start becoming a dictator or a monarch. And this really starts with Washington's example of retiring after only 2 terms. All right, so I've hinted at this cabinet a lot, so let's talk about it. All right, so Washington Congress create several departments to help Washington run the country. These departments are then going to be led by a person who's called a secretary. Okay? Now, this isn't a secretary like you'd see in an office building, someone who answers the phones or types up documents, mails letters, that sort of thing. This type of secretary is someone who leads an agency or a department. For example, the secretary, what was called the person called the Secretary of War, runs the Department of War. Today we call it the Department of Defense, but back in the 1780s it was called the Department of War. And someone named a secretary would run that department. And so Washington and Congress create several, not several, really just a few departments to help Washington run it. And these group of secretaries are known as the cabinet. All right, these are the people who advised Washington. And as I say, every other president since Washington has also used a cabinet. And these cabinet members, again, run these various departments and they advise the president. Now, Washington's cabinet is going to include the most famous cabinet members ever. Thomas Jefferson is going to be his Secretary of State. The State Department is the agency that deals with foreign countries. Okay. So your diplomats and that sort of thing are going to work for the State Department. And the Secretary of State, Thomas Jefferson, runs the State Department. Alexander Hamilton is going to run the Treasury Department. The Treasury Department is what deals with the country's finances, deals with their money. Henry Knox, who was a Revolutionary War general under Washington, he's going to be named the first Secretary of War to run the War Department. And finally, as we mentioned before, Edmund Randolph is the Attorney General, the first Attorney General. He's going to run the Justice Department. And that was it. You had 4 departments run by four people. As I said earlier, today you have well over a dozen different departments that help the president, and each of them, although it's still run by a single secretary at the top, have hundreds and hundreds of people, sometimes probably thousands of people working in those departments to help run. So the government was much, much smaller during Washington's day. Okay. Let's stop this lesson for here. This is going to be kind of a short lesson because I want to make sure we have plenty of time to cover this next issue. And those are some of the problems facing the nation when it gets started, and particularly some of the financial issues that are really going to determine or set the tone for some of the debates and arguments that are going to take place within Washington's cabinet during his first and second term, excuse me. So we'll do those in our next lecture.